Welcome to the Missing Dots. Today we are going to talk about something that happens every year on the streets. Something many of us have seen since childhood, people gathering, chanting, crying loudly, and remembering Imam Hussein. Most of us think this is how it always was from the very beginning. But what if the real history is different? What if the Imams themselves never took out public processions on the streets? What if this whole public style of mourning was later shaped by kings and rulers for their own reasons? In this episode, we will look at the facts carefully without taking any side and try to find the missing dots that most people never talk about. Stay with me till the end.
You know, it's actually kind of surreal just sitting out here in the mosque courtyard today.
Yeah, it really is.
I mean, we're completely surrounded by this quiet, just the faint sound of the trees, maybe a few footsteps here and there.
It's beautiful. Sitting here after prayer, the silence really strikes you, especially considering, the history we were looking at today.
Right, absolutely.
Because we were talking about a tradition that is profoundly loud. It's incredibly public and visually just overwhelming in the modern world. But tracing the historical facts back to their source, it reveals a completely different atmosphere.
It really forces us to question our basic assumptions. Because when people see hundreds of thousands of mourners in the streets today, moving in rhythm with massive black banners and chants, the human brain just naturally assumes permanence.
Right. We think it's always been this way.
Exactly. We assume that if we, traveled back in time to the year 700, 800, we would witness the exact same public spectacle.
But the earliest, most authentic historical texts point to something entirely different. I was reading through some of the notes on the first 2 centuries after Karbala.
The crucial early period.
Yeah, roughly from 61 AH, the year the tragedy actually took place, up until about 250 AH. The sources, including foundational collections like al-Kafi and biographical records like Rijal al-Kashshi, they describe a practice that was entirely confined to the home.
Completely domestic.
It was private, right?
Yes, completely. The survivors of Karbala and the Imams who followed them, they established what is known as a Majalis.
Which literally just means a place of sitting, right?
Exactly, a sitting. It was a private gathering, often behind closed doors. I mean, Imam Zayn al-Abidin, who was present at Karbala and survived the massacre of his family, and later figures like Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq, they never organized a street procession.
Wow.
Yeah, there is no historical record of them closing a market or leading a public march.
Wait, that is such a striking detail to just pause on.
Yeah.
You have individuals who experienced or inherited a level of trauma that is hard for us to even comprehend.
Beyond comprehension, really.
Right. And the natural, raw human instinct when you face that kind of brutal injustice is to just go out into the street and scream.
It's what you would expect.
But instead, they gathered people in their living rooms and patronized master poets.
Yeah, they invited renowned poets, men like Kumayt and Debil, to compose and recite Marthiya. This was classical Arabic elegy. It was highly structured, deeply intellectual poetry.
I always wondered about the reason behind that silence, though. Because my immediate thought is survival.
Sure, the political reality.
Right, we know the politics of that era. The Imams and their followers were living under the immense pressure of the Umayyad dynasty and later the Abbasid Empire. They were under constant state surveillance.
And facing severe persecution.
Exactly. So keeping the grief inside a house just seems like a necessary measure to stay alive.
The threat of the state was absolutely a massive factor. They could not safely protest in the streets. But if we analyze the specific instructions the Imams gave to their followers during those gatherings, we see something far deeper than just political caution.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they were making a deliberate theological choice about how human grief should be processed.
How so? Like, what was the specific instruction?
They established a very firm boundary between 2 concepts, Baka and Niyaha.
Okay, Baka being the weeping.
Right. Baka is the act of quiet, dignified, reflective weeping. It's a sorrow that brings you closer to the divine. Niyah, on the other hand, was the loud, chaotic, professional wailing that was extremely common in pre-Islamic Arabia.
Ah, the Jahiliyyah practices, where mourning involved tearing at your clothes, striking your face, screaming chaotically.
Yes. Niyaha often involved wealthy families actually hiring professional mourners.
To just wail in the streets.
Exactly, to wail in the streets, to display the family status. The Imams explicitly forbade this kind of chaotic, performative grief. They wanted the memory of Imam Hussein to be preserved through intellectual reflection and sincere, quiet tears.
That makes sense.
They viewed the chaotic public spectacle as something that lacked submission to the will of God.
SubhanAllah, that level of restraint is just incredible. They took an event that could have easily sparked generations of unchecked, chaotic rage, and they curated the grief.
They did.
They turned it into an intellectual and spiritual discipline.
They created a space of profound moral dignity. But, you know, that quiet dignity creates a historical puzzle for us today.
Right, because a quiet gathering of poets in a private living room does not naturally evolve into a million people marching in the streets and stopping traffic.
No, it doesn't.
Something external has to happen to take that private sorrow and thrust it into the public square.
And that external force was state power.
Ah.
The shift from the private home to the public street was not driven by religious scholars or some organic theological evolution. It was driven by kings and empires.
A political shift.
An entirely political shift. The definitive turning point in the historical record happens in Baghdad in the year 352 AH, which is 963 CE. The city was under the control of a man named Mu'izz al-Dawla.
Okay.
He was a ruler from the Buyid dynasty.
The Buyids are a really fascinating piece of this puzzle because they were a Shia military dynasty, but they were ruling over Baghdad, which was the capital of the Sunni Abbasid Caliphate.
Precisely.
So they had military control, but they were ideologically a minority in that city.
Which is exactly why Mu'izz al-Dawla took the action he did. He issued this unprecedented official decree. He ordered all the bustling markets of Baghdad to completely shut down on the day of Ashura.
Wow, all of them.
All of them. He mandated that people set up mourning tents in the streets, dress in black, and publicly wail.
So forcing a medieval commercial hub to just stop all business and ordering the public to participate, I mean, that is not just facilitating a religious observance.
Not at all.
That is a massive display of political dominance. It's almost like a modern political rally mixing with a religious memory. A minority ruler marking his territory and telling the Abbasid capital, we are here and I am in charge.
It is the weaponization of a sacred memory for political theater. Mu'izz al-Dawla realized that public synchronized mourning is an incredible tool for forging communal identity and projecting state power.
And once that door's open,
Exactly. Once that precedent was set in Baghdad, later empires looked at that blueprint and scaled it up to a level that is almost hard to imagine.
which brings us to the Safavid Empire, right?
Yeah.
In the 16th century.
Yes, the Safavids.
I know they completely transformed Iran by making 12 Rashidism the official state religion, but their geopolitical situation was really precarious, wasn't it? They were locked in a massive existential rivalry with the Sunni Ottoman Empire right next door.
To survive that rivalry, the Safavids needed to build a highly distinct, unified national identity. They needed their citizens to feel profoundly different from the Ottomans.
Right.
So they institutionalized the mourning of Imam Hussein on a massive state level. They took the private gathering and built it into the very architecture of the state.
What did that actually look like on the ground? I mean, day to day.
They introduced and funded a practice called Rada Kwani. This involved building elevated parades where specialized reciters would deliver highly formal, emotional narratives of the Karbala tragedy to massive crowds.
And the state funded this.
Entirely. The state funded these reciters.
So it moves from a quiet circle in a home to a street market in Baghdad, and now to large state-sponsored pulpits.
And it did not stop there. The natural evolution of state-sponsored storytelling is theatrical reenactment. By the time the Qajar dynasty takes over Iran in the late 18th century, you see the rise of Taziyah.
The Passion Plays. I've seen footage of modern versions of these, but during the Qajar period, these were massive royal productions, weren't they?
They were enormous. The Qajar kings built giant, permanent, circular theaters in Tehran, like the famous Tekia Dalit, specifically to host these plays.
Giant theaters just for this.
Yeah. And the state provided costumes, authentic armor, live horses, and professional actors to stage full theatrical battles in front of tens of thousands of people. The visual spectacle was entirely funded by the empire.
The sheer trajectory of that is wild. From a single poet reciting classical Arabic in a living room just to avoid state surveillance, to a royal theater with live horses funded by the king.
It's quite the leap.
It perfectly explains why the visual scale of these processions is so massive today. But, it doesn't fully explain the sound.
You mean the auditory experience of the morning?
Yes. Because if you observe a procession in the Middle East, it sounds completely different from a procession in South Asia. like in India or Pakistan.
Oh, absolutely.
The visual elements might share a root, but the rhythm, the language, and the emotional texture of the South Asian observances feel entirely unique.
That brings us to one of the most culturally rich chapters of this history. When the tradition migrated to the Indian subcontinent, it encountered a completely different artistic and linguistic landscape. This blending primarily took shape under the Nawabs of Oudh.
Centered in Lucknow. The Nawabs were incredibly wealthy patrons of the arts, and they essentially fostered a cultural renaissance there.
They did, and under their patronage, the highly elite, classical Arabic and Persian forms of poetry were deliberately translated and adapted into the local vernacular.
So making it for the common people.
Exactly. This is the era that gives birth to the Urdu Noha and the Urdu Marthiya.
This is where legendary literary figures like Mir Anis and Mirza Dabir enter the picture.
Their contribution cannot be overstated. Mir Anis and Mirza Dabir took the sophisticated literary structures of Persian poetry and fused them with local Indian musical scales.
Or ragas.
Right, the ragas. They also absorbed elements from the dramatic folk traditions of northern India.
The mechanics of that are fascinating to me. If you take a profound tragedy and you map the words onto an Indian raga, a musical scale that is specifically, almost mathematically designed to evoke a very particular emotional response in the human brain, you fundamentally change how the listener processes the information.
You really do.
It bypasses the intellectual decoding of complex Arabic grammar and goes straight to the emotional center of the brain.
It democratizes the grief. Suddenly, you did not need to be an educated scholar of classical Arabic to participate in the Majalis.
Right, anyone could join in.
Exactly. A farmer, a laborer, an ordinary person on the street could hear the rhythm, feel the emotion of the raga, memorize the Urdu verses, and just chant along. It embedded the memory of Imam Hussein deeply into the cultural soil of South Asia.
But I find myself wondering about the cost of that translation.
Yeah.
We talked earlier about the Imams insisting on baka, that quiet intellectual reflection.
Yes.
When you translate classical Arabic theology into a highly rhythmic vernacular street chant designed for mass emotional participation, doesn't the sheer spectacle risk replacing the actual theology? Doesn't the emotion overshadow the intellectual message?
It is a recognized paradox, and many classical scholars have pointed out exactly what you're noticing.
Really?
Yeah. While the vernacular poetry made the history accessible to millions, it also shifted the center of gravity. The focus moved heavily away from quiet intellectual reflection on the moral principles of Imam Hussein and leaned heavily into emotional catharsis and performative spectacle.
So the feeling becomes the point, rather than the lesson.
In many ways, yes. The physical rhythm of chest beating and the emotional high of the music often become the primary focus for the participant.
Which brings us to the reality of what we see on the streets today. Because sometimes observing these mass performances can be deeply overwhelming.
It can be.
The sheer physical intensity, the volume of the crowds, the extreme acts of mourning, it prompts the question of how modern scholars and religious authorities actually navigate this chaos. It can't just be a cultural free-for-all, right?
It isn't. There is a very robust internal mechanism within Islamic jurisprudence that constantly audits these practices. Both Sunni and Shia legal frameworks maintain the strict prohibition against the pre-Islamic practice of Naya.
That chaotic, destructive wailing we discussed earlier.
Exactly. But even beyond that, there is a constant scholarly pushback against the extremes of street culture.
How does a scholar actually push back against something that has so much cultural momentum, though? I mean, once millions of people are used to a certain rhythm or a certain emotional high, they don't want to let it go.
It requires immense intellectual courage from the scholars. One of the most prominent examples from the 20th century is Ayatollah Motahari, a highly influential Iranian philosopher and scholar.
I've heard of him.
He wrote an entire series of lectures analyzing this exact problem. He was fiercely critical of how the cultural practices had devolved.
What specifically did he critique? Was it the physical acts of mourning?
He critiqued the professionalization of the grief and the distortion of the history itself.
The distortion of the history.
Yes. Motahari pointed out that because professional reciters were judged by how many tears they could extract from the crowd, they started inventing false, highly sensationalized stories about Karbala.
Oh, wow. So they were just making things up for the reaction.
Exactly. They would add exaggerated numbers to the battles or invent tragic subplots that never happened purely to manipulate the crowd's emotions.
So the historical truth was being sacrificed for the sake of a louder reaction.
Worse than that, Motahari argued that the core theological message was being corrupted. He warned that people were beginning to view Imam Hussein merely as a tragic savior figure whose only purpose in dying was to guarantee his followers a ticket to paradise in exchange for their tears.
Stripping away the actual political and moral revolution he stood for?
Precisely. Motahari wanted people to understand Hussein as an active moral exemplar, a man who stood up against tyranny, not just a passive victim to be cried over.
That is a crucial distinction.
It is. And he and other senior jurists also heavily criticize unseemly street behaviors using a legal concept called tohmat.
Tohmat meaning actions that bring public ridicule or defamation to the faith.
Yes. When participants engage in extreme physical mourning in the streets, actions that look irrational or barbaric to an outside observer, scholars argue that it repels people from the actual message of Islam. They issue rulings to ban practices that bring tohmat upon the religion.
That makes total sense from a scholarly and legal perspective. But here's the lingering question for me. If the leading scholars are writing books, giving lectures, and issuing rulings against these excesses, why does the extreme street behavior remain so deeply entrenched?
It's a fair question.
Right. Because if you stand on the street and watch thousands of people aggressively beating their chests in unison, to a secular observer, it looks entirely irrational. What is actually happening in the crowd?
To understand the persistence of it, we have to step outside of theology for a moment and look at social psychology. For the masses participating on the street, this is not just a historical anniversary. It is an active mechanism for collective trauma processing and moral solidarity.
What is the psychological mechanism at play there, though?
When you look at the data on mass global grief rituals, you see a phenomenon called emotional contagion.
Like the psychological sinking of a crowd.
Precisely. When thousands of people gather, synchronize their breathing through chanting, move their bodies in the same physical rhythm, and weep together, it triggers a profound neurological response. It completely dissolves the ego.
Interesting.
It reduces the feeling of individual isolation and binds the community together on a visceral level.
So the physical action, even something as intense as striking the chest, is less about inflicting pain on oneself and more about achieving that synchronization with the group. It is about feeling a shared catharsis.
The physical rhythm creates a shared emotional reality, and beyond the psychology, there is a vital sociological function.
Which is?
The annual public performance serves as a perpetual living protest. By mourning a historical victim of oppression together in the public square, the community is publicly reaffirming their shared moral stance.
I see.
They map the historical struggle of Karbala onto whatever contemporary socio-political realities or injustices they are facing in their own lives today.
Alhamdulillah. That is a truly powerful perspective. It means that even when the historical form of the mourning has been heavily altered, whether by the decrees of kings in Baghdad, or the theatrical ambitions of Persian empires, or the musical traditions of India, the core human intention of the ordinary person on the street remains sincere.
It really does.
It is a genuine expression of love for the Prophet's family and an unbroken psychological stand against oppression.
The history of how the rituals evolved is undeniably messy, deeply political, and constantly debated by scholars. But the underlying human need to stand shoulder to shoulder, process grief, and publicly side with the oppressed remains a very pure, very genuine reality.
Sitting here in this quiet courtyard, thinking about that whole timeline, it leaves you with a profound contrast. We have seen how the grand, loud, massive public spectacles were largely constructed by kings and empires to project their own political power. Meanwhile, the most intimate, dignified, and intellectually rigorous tears were modeled quietly by the Imams themselves behind closed doors. It poses a real question for anyone looking back at this history. How do you, in your own life today, choose to preserve the true moral lesson of Karbala? Is it found in the overwhelming volume of the crowd or in the quiet reflection of the heart?
That's the real question, isn't it?
To rebuild your mental peace and legacy today, give charity, sponsor a student, and plant a tree. May Allah grant us success. Don't forget to, come on, let's go. Don't forget to follow this channel, The Missing Dots. Thank you.